Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Recently, the UN General Assembly has overwhelmingly backed a resolution asking the Security Council to make Palestine, which has the UN observer status, a full member. 143 countries voted in favor and 25 abstained, while 9 were against, including the US and Israel. What does the resounding approval mean to the Palestinians? What are the challenges still ahead for Palestine to become a full UN member state? As the conflict ongoing in Gaza, how far are we from a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue? Join us for our discussion today from Beijing. I'm Xu Jinduo. Joining me today are Rick Danam, visiting scholar from Tsinghua University, Dr. Gail Luft, co-director of the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security, and Wang Jin, associate professor from Northwest University of China. Welcome to Dialogue. So Wang Jin, I will start with you. The resounding approval for a full membership in the UN for the Palestinians. How do you see this, high rate of approval here?
I think the approval itself from the United Nations actually represents the very pressing or the very strong voice from international society or the majority of the international community that the Palestinian people's rights should be respected and the future nationhood of the Palestinian people should be recognized. And also it represents that the kind of the consensus or kind of the shared willingness from the international community to push forward the Palestinian people's rights that should be recognized and respected by the international community has already been formed. So I think it is why we call it a very historic moment. Although we know that, of course, it is just the approval of United Nations Assembly rather than the United Nations Security Council, because there were still some further procedures should be finished if the Palestinians wanted to be accepted as a full member of the United Nations. But it should be still considered as a very, very major historic victory by the international community to express the willingness to express their attitudes that the support or the recognition of the Palestinian people. So that is why I think it is a very historic moment that would be remembered maybe in the future, decades later.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, the Palestinians have been applying to join the UN, if I'm right, since 2011. So it's been 13 years. So what do you think, this overwhelming approval mean to the Palestinians?
Well, I think it's a symbolic victory and a real victory. It's a real victory in that the United Nations has stated overwhelmingly that the Palestinian people are a people deserving of statehood, that they are a national people. It's symbolic in that there is not a nation of Palestine. There's not an army. There's not a legislature. They're not ready to govern themselves today, tomorrow, whenever they would be recognized as a national state. But the United Nations believes that they should be a state, and that is very significant. Mm-hmm. And overwhelmingly, it wasn't even close. It wasn't even as close as the vote when the United Nations recognized Israel back nearly 60 years ago.
Right. Rick mentioned about the potential challenges for the Palestinians to become a full UN membership. But before that, let's take a look at the response from, for example, in particular, Israel. Its ambassador to the UN, Mr. Erdan, in a strong display of outrage, he shredded the UN Charter at the UN General Assembly. So Gao, why the Israelis, they are so sensitive to a potential membership in the UN for the Palestinians?
First of all, this idea of Palestinian statehood or unilateral Palestinian statehood, declaration of statehood, is not a new one. I remember 25 years ago, exactly this month, when I was in Washington, the biggest issue of the day was just before May 4th, 1999, when the world was holding its breath because it was the expiration date of the 5-year interim period after the Cairo Accord, in which statehood was supposed to be declared, and everybody was waiting on Yasser Arafat to declare statehood, and he didn't. And the reason he didn't it has to do with the fact that there is no viability to a Palestinian state that is declared unilaterally, because let's suppose Palestine becomes a UN member. Let's say it happens. But what happens next? How does it help the Palestinians? They have no borders. They have no ports. They have no airport. They have no ability to generate electricity. They have no water resources. They have no food. And the most important thing, they don't even have a way to move between the two parts of the state, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. So a statehood, it's maybe a symbolic thing, but it doesn't connote the viability of a state. And therefore, they will not be able to do anything on this matter without active participation of the Israeli side, which everything has to be done in cooperation with Israel. And the reason Israel does not think that this vote was helpful is for two reasons. One is because it sort of gives a reward to Hamas. Let's assume they succeed and they're approved as a member. Then Hamas will say, look, you guys, you Fatah, which allegedly are more moderate, but you've been sitting on your hands for 30 years and you accomplished nothing. And then we came and killed 1,200 Israelis. And look, next thing, after 6 months, 7 months, we have a state. So that's not a good signal. And the other thing is, we are still in the midst of very, very delicate negotiations over ceasefire and hostage release and all these things. And to come in the middle of all this with this big elephant and sort of without really realizing how it will impact those very, very sensitive negotiations. So I think the timing of this was very poor. Now, it doesn't mean that the idea of Palestinian statehood should not be negotiated and discussed. And I could tell you that there is quite a sizable majority of Israelis that before October 7th supported this idea. Even Netanyahu himself is on the record supporting the idea of two-state solution. So it's not something that is anathema to Israelis. Now, after October 7th, there are second thoughts, and it will take time for the dust to settle and for Israelis to decide how they want to move forward with this. But I think the timing is not very helpful and doesn't really advance the Palestinian cause.
Mm-hmm. Well, Wang Jin, given what Gao has mentioned about, and also, probably the challenges on the ground, in terms of a full integral state in that place, what are the potential benefits of becoming a full UN membership here?
I think, yes, Gao just mentioned a very important question. And actually, the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, has no choice right now. But the only way to break the very dilemma or the stalemate it is facing is to apply for the 4 members in the United Nations, because the Palestinian Authority are not able to resist the effectively of the Israelis' expansion of their Jewish settlements in the East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And also the Palestinian Authority is not able to constrain the Israelis' military actions in the Gaza Strip. So that is why the only thing that they can do, especially under the growing voices inside Israel, that the two-state solution principle should be abandoned, that they have to apply for the recognition as the 4 members of the United Nations. They have to get the recognition from more international community to maintain their status or their rights as independent states would be respected. So that is why Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian state, they hope to get the 4 membership in the United Nations. Although, as we know that there will be obstacles, and especially we know that the United States will be very likely to prevent the possible passing of the Palestinians for membership in the process, inside the United Nations Security Council voting process. But then we have to know that the process itself is very meaningful, given that the more and more states has already expressed their willingness or their support to the two-state solution, and these express their support for the future establishment of the independent Palestinian state, and their public support to recognize the Palestinian state and to hope to establish the diplomatic relations with them. So that is why this is very meaningful, and it's a very historic moment that should be remembered in the future.
Right. I mean, full UN membership does not mean an independent Palestinian state. But Rick, still, I mean, in a sense, given this resounding approval in the UN General Assembly, it reveals, the outstanding issue of Israel and its allies, including the United States, the isolated status internationally, right? Only like 9 countries voted against. That includes, of course, Israel and the U.S. So in that sense, that's also some achievement for the Palestinians.
It's a major achievement for the Palestinians. I'd say it's a stinging defeat for the United States and for the Biden administration. I've been watching over the last few months as the Biden administration becomes more and more isolated, first from many allies in Southeastern Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and now more and more in Europe. I think it damages American relations with allies, not on all issues, but it just damages the close ties. And I think the longer this drags on, the longer Benjamin Netanyahu continues this war without end, the worse it is for the United States. I think you're seeing clear messages from the U.S. Secretary of State. You're seeing clear messages from the American president. You're seeing clear messages from Donald Trump. Get it over with. You heard from the U.S. Secretary of State this week saying you're only making Hamas stronger. Hamas is not going away. Hamas is going to be with us forever. And yet Benjamin Netanyahu will not end it. The United States knows that it's isolated and wants to get it over with, but the United States is not willing to walk away from Israel. So it's no win. I say the Biden administration only has itself to blame because it will not walk away from Israel at the United Nations.
Well, Gao, of course, at least on paper, on record, most of the countries would agree a two-state solution, right? Now we have a Israeli state, and of course, in a sense, it would be good to have a Palestinian state, and then they can find a peace. They can, coexist peacefully, a neighbor, as neighbors there. You mentioned about some of the difficulties. Of course, they are just realistic issue, challenges for the Palestinians. But one thing, the expansion of settlements in the West Bank is actually squeezing the space of a potential of a future Palestinian state. That's done by the Israelis, by Jewish settlers. So is Israelis actually, making the chance of an independent Palestinian state, less and less? Do you think there's a discussion, there's a recognition of that?
Yes, I think that there is an understanding that as time goes by, it will be more and more difficult to extricate those two people from each other, and then so time is definitely an element here. But one of the risks that we are taking here is we're talking about two-state solutions, but we may end up with a three-state solution, in the sense that we have the West Bank, which is one territory, and then there is the Gaza Strip, which is completely separated territory that is, and the one is still Hamas is in charge, and the other one, the Palestinian Authority is in charge. We don't know who will be in charge in Gaza, So we don't even know who will be the sort of the owner of all this on the Palestinian side. We don't know if the Gazan people will accept the West Bank people or the Palestinian Authority and agree to be governed by them. We don't know if what happens if there is elections, for example, because we see the polls and the results of the polls in the West Bank show overwhelming support for Hamas. So one of the things that you may end up seeing is that, okay, you get your state, then the next thing you want a state to be a democracy, right? Because democracy is amazing, right? So you must have elections. And then what happens is that you have Hamas both in Gaza and the West Bank. And then you created a Hamastan. And I'm not sure that given the agenda of Hamas, the behavior of Hamas, what Hamas has been doing, their track record, I'm not sure that this will make the region safer. It will make the world a better place. So we have to be very careful. I know that a lot of people are celebrating this vote, and I'm not really impressed by UN votes. 140 countries voted against Russia to end the war in Ukraine, multiple times, by the way. Where that ended. So let's calm down with our enthusiasm. It may be a symbolic stage, but I don't think it will make the region any more safer than it is now. And I think we have to be very careful not to create the condition for a Hamastan to emerge, because that will never bring stability and peace to this region.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, what's the U.S. Future plan? Officially, the U.S. stick to the two-state solution, and if there's an election, as Gal suggested, Hamas could win, could become, a Palestine ruled by Hamas. Is there any possibility, like if you look at what happened to the Northern Ireland situation, right? An armed group could become a political win and then to negotiate, to talk, to solve their problem. Is that any chance to that?
Well, I think the future from the American perspective depends on who's elected president. If Joe Biden is elected president, two-state solution is going to be the American policy, and we'll have to wait to see who the next Israeli prime minister is. I mean, when the fighting ends in Gaza, there's going to be an election in Israel. The question is if we have a new president in the United States first. So the question then is Donald Trump going to be president come 2025? If Donald Trump is president, all bets are off. We don't know. Donald Trump, I am quite doubtful that Donald Trump believes in a two-state solution, but Donald Trump is not a fan of Benjamin Netanyahu. He's been very critical of Benjamin Netanyahu. So I have no idea what Donald Trump believes going forward. Donald Trump's very close to the Saudis. And so we have to guess what does Saudi Arabia want going forward. So I think that would be the big question. What does Saudi Arabia want for Israel and Palestine if Donald Trump is president?
Mm-hmm. So Wang Jian, of course, if you look at the resolution that was sponsored mostly by Arab nations, of course, including Saudi Arabia here. So what's the plan for the Arab nations? It seems like they are sticking to this two-state solution. They are supporting a Palestinian state. But given what Gal has said, do they accept if there's a Hamas, let's say, government in both Gaza and also the West Bank? Is that acceptable for the parties, for the regional countries here?
I think we're talking about how the regional countries' attitudes, especially the Arab states' attitudes towards the future Palestinian internal relations. So, of course, there were divisions because some states, they hope, if we're talking about Syria, actually Syria government, they supported the Hamas even more than their support to the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah. But when we are talking about the majority of the Arab states, I think they may show more support to the Palestinian Authority led by Fatah, led by Mahmoud Abbas, rather than the Fatah. Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So that is why it's a very kind of the division inside the Arab states. But the problem is that there is no unified government inside the Palestinians. The divisions between the Fatah and the Hamas are deeply rooted into the factors such as ideological divisions, such as the status of their government, and how such as the how whether or not to recognize Israel and how whether or not to accept the international resolutions passed by the United Nations during the past decades. So there was a lot of the divisions and the problem between the different sides, especially Fatah and Hamas. So that is why I think, yes, the Arab states, they can determine something, especially their attitudes. They will give a lot of pressure to Israel. They will give a lot of pressure to the United States, and also their attitudes in different international platforms will, of course, influence the behaviors of the related parties. But I think the most important thing that the international community should do right now is to help to melt down the divisions between the Palestinians, internal divisions, especially between Fatah, Hamas, and Fatah, to find a way together in the future.
Well, speak of that one, Jane. The leaders of Fatah and Hamas, they were in Beijing not long ago. Obviously, China tries to bring them together and to achieve a sort of reconciliation. There are differences. Seems they are also facing a challenge for the future Palestinian state. We don't know how much progress is expected and what they need to do in order to achieve some solidarity among the two parties, especially toward Israel.
Yes. The meeting in Beijing, I think maybe just weeks ago, is a very historic moment, because we know that there has already, although they met just before Beijing, they met in Moscow, but actually the meeting in Moscow and the meeting in Beijing between Hamas and Fatah represented a very strong aspiration from international community to help to narrow the divisions between the two sides, and it also represents China's willingness to help to coordinate and to coordinate the different stances of Hamas and Fatah. So that is why the meeting itself should be considered as a victory. But we know that there were still divisions and still a lot of the problem between the two sides. And we have to know that during the past, more than 10 years, Fatah and Hamas reached a lot of agreements in Doha, in Riyadh, in Cairo, even in Sana'a, and even in Algeria. So a lot of documents has already been filed, and a lot of the agreement has been signed. But the path ahead is still full of difficulties, especially the distrust between the two sides are still very apparent. So that is why I think that China's help is very important. But I think maybe more assistance and more channels should be established by the international community to bring the two sides more together, to find a way ahead, not only to resist the Israelis' expansion of the Jewish settlements, but also to try to end the internal divisions and to help facilitate the two-state solution-based Israeli and Palestinian peace to reach as early as possible.
Here's a question for Gao. You mentioned about the state of unacceptable to the Israelis, in particular, if Hamas, there's a Hamas ruling of both West Bank and Gaza Strip. You say it's not necessarily safer for the Israelis. But the thing is, the current state, with this kind of paralysis, kind of division there, it's not safe to the Israelis either, right? So what is the plan for the Israeli government? What kind of plan they have for this region, for their relationship with the Palestinians?
It's a very good question, and I don't have a good answer, because I think that the political environment in Israel is not conducive at the moment for long-term sort of strategic designs. Israel is now still in the middle of a war. The people are still burying their dead, and the general atmosphere is very gloomy. I think we need to give it some time for the Israeli public to sort of extract themselves, for the dust to settle, and then to figure out, okay, what do we do with all this next? Where do we want to go? I think it's very difficult to do it while the war is raging, because things are getting very emotional, and also there are internal division, as you said. And I want to also throw in another issue here. This is not only about Israel and the Palestinians. You know, you have Jordan. Jordan is just across the river, and they have a very sizable Palestinian majority there. There is a lot of potential instability. There's also Egypt. So those two countries, Egypt and Jordan, are very important players, much less so than the Saudis and all the cousins from the Persian Gulf. They are far away, they are secure, but Egypt and Jordan are sort of part and parcel of all of this design, and they have a lot to say too. And I'm not sure that sort of behind closed doors, the Jordanians are very excited about the idea of having a Palestinian state that ultimately will probably be governed by Hamas or something like Hamas, sitting sort of on their front yard, because it could be highly destabilizing. And this is also the longest border that Israel shares with any of its neighbors. So these are all things that Israel will have to discuss. But I really think that it's not the right time to do it while the blood is boiling, while emotions are high, and while still people are being killed. I think the most important thing is to reach a ceasefire, to return the hostages, to let things calm down, to begin the reconstruction, and then approach the real big issue. Okay, what do we do next? All the sides have been really injured and suffered a lot. There's no doubt about that. But things cannot repeat themselves, and I think that will be the next big set of questions that all sides, including the United States, the next president, will have to deal with.
Well, Speaker of the United States, as Rick mentioned earlier, the U.S. Seems to have, imposed some sort of pressure on the Israelis. For example, President Biden has warned that if Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu orders a major assault on Rafah, the U.S. will halt some arms supplies. Although it's just one shipment, it's not really a change of policy of supporting Israel, but that will create some pressure on the Israeli side. Rick, is that true? And also, how far will the Biden administration go in order to, let's say, access some restraint, or to ensure there will be some restraint on the Israeli side?
It's true. It's already happened, and it's been threatened for the future. I mean, what's happened already is delays in sending the huge bunker buster bombs, the bombs that were used in northern Gaza that killed so many people, because the Biden administration has basically said that they would not serve any purpose in southern Gaza. But right now, basically right now, the Biden administration is saying that we will give you aid that is necessary to defend yourself, but we don't want to give aid that will just kill innocent people. But the Biden administration is getting a lot of political blowback in the United States from some pro-Israel Democrats, as well as a lot of Republicans, for not supporting Israel at a time of war. And they're getting criticism from the Israeli government also. So it's hard to say if the Biden administration will continue with this policy. But yes, it is happening, and the Biden administration is trying to get Israel to.
Yes, we have to stop there. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.